Hello there, it's your friend Phil, project management trainer and coach. Today we're going to be talking about PMP exam prep quick tips. These are tips that have been put together by Emily and I to help our students. The main purpose of these tips is to better prepare you to tackle questions on the PMP exam. One of the things that we recommend is taking lots of great mock exams that are tested and tried. As you take these mock exams, you should learn how to deal with long-winded questions, with vague questions. You should also be aware when you take these mock exams that the project manager is a problem solver. You need to make sure that you read the entire sentence in the answers, because one thing could make that answer wrong. Answer the questions as though you are in a strong matrix or projectized firm, depending on the question. Be sure to answer all the questions. You will not be penalized for guessing, so you've got a 25% chance of getting a question right, if only you attempt it. So make sure you attempt all the questions. For that reason, pacing yourself is very important. You need to develop a feel for the kind of velocity that you can generate on your exam. And you only get this feel by taking lots of mock exams. How many questions can you knock out? 20 an hour? If you're like me on my PMP exam, my first hour I spent on 20 questions. I immediately made a dramatic choice to jump from question 20 and go all the way to question 200. That saved my exam. So you need to pace yourself and be ready to execute a strategy when you come across a pocket of very difficult questions like I did. Don't waste too much time answering questions that are like a wall of difficulty. You get to know the exam better as you take more and more mock exams. You get to know if breaks work for you by trying those breaks out on your own before you go into the real exam. So, after you have taken mock exams, you've gotten a better idea of your velocity, what works and what doesn't. But here is Emily's 4-point tips for PMP exam decision-making questions. When you get these questions that test your decision-making, first of all, look at the impact of whatever is at hand, the impact of that decision. Evaluate alternatives. That's another thing the project manager should do. Next, discuss with the sponsor to get sponsor approval. And lastly, get customer approval. So if you have a question that gives you these 4 types of alternatives, you can evaluate the impact, or you could evaluate alternatives depending on what the question says. The question may state that you have already analyzed the impact. It may not say you've evaluated alternatives. It may also say you've evaluated alternatives. What should you do next? Do you just implement without consulting the sponsor? No. How about implementing massive change since the sponsor agreed but the customer didn't? You don't do that. So these 4 points, keep them in mind. As the project manager, I need to assess the impact of this decision in the question. I need to look at the impact of what is at stake, and then I need to evaluate alternatives. You don't just do one, you evaluate what is best, and then discuss with the sponsor and get customer approval. Now these are Emily's 5-point tips for PMP exam formula questions. Write the formula on your crib sheet at the beginning. That could save you a lot of time, especially if you're the kind of person who forgets formulas under pressure, and that's normal. That happens to some people. So write the formula. Before doing anything else, make sure that it is truly a calculation question on the exam. Don't be surprised. You'll get a wall of numbers in a question, and you could think, oh, that's an earned value question. And you could start solving. Don't do that. Don't do anything until you have ensured it is truly a calculation question. Because some questions could test you on the implication of something. For example, SPI is 0.9, CPI is 0.5, TCPI is whatever it is. What does it mean? Now you could get all of these values and start calculating something, but they're only asking you what it means. What does it mean about your project if this is the case in your earned value metrics? Okay? Now, if you find out that it is truly a formula question, then work out the answer. Some people are tempted to guess. Don't guess except you don't know, except you aren't sure. If you are sure, really work out the question. Use the formula, use the logic, work it out. What is worth doing is worth doing well. So that would be my suggestion. Actually do it. The next one here is take the numbers and plug them in. So remember, you've written down the formula, take the numbers, plug them in, and then check your work. So those are Emily's 5-point tips. Don't get all carried away when you see those numbers on questions. Now let's look at some examples of these troublesome questions that could appear. Types of troublesome questions. You have just been assigned to the PLC LLC project. Everything appears to be going well. You just reported on status to your boss when suddenly you discover a big problem that needs to be resolved. What should you do immediately? Okay. So everything looks good. I just sent a report or made a verbal report to my boss, and then I discover a big problem. Now, it doesn't tell me what that problem is, but it does need to be resolved. What should I do? Okay. A, call a meeting of all the stakeholders to recommend schedule compression approaches. Now, while that sounds like something that could be done on a project, we don't know that we've got a schedule issue. We don't even know what the issue is. It just says a big problem that needs to be resolved. Okay, so I guess A, right off the bat, we can say A is a little bit bogus. Call a meeting of all the stakeholders. You know what it means when you say all the stakeholders? I mean, why would you even call all the stakeholders if you're going to talk schedule compression approaches? B, speak to your customer immediately and share the bad news early before it's too late. Well, again, it's a problem that we don't know. So we need to get down to the bottom of the problem, in my opinion, before we do anything else. So it's too early to go speaking to the customer about what we don't know. We don't know what bad news they're talking about in this question. So B is kind of bogus as well. It's not something I would do in the real world. C, research the problem to identify a possible solution using expert judgment and historical information from similar past projects. Now, C, while I may not actually need to use historical information, and while I may not have similar past projects, researching the problem to identify a possible solution using expert judgment sounds like a good thing to do before I do anything else. I know the word research sounds rather big, but research can be substituted with analyze the problem or investigate the problem, you know. Let's look at D before we make a final judgment call on this one. And D is call your boss and let him know the bad news. What bad news? I mean, it talks about a big problem, but what bad news? Bad news and a big problem are different. Anyway, let's say the bad news is the problem. Call your boss and let him know the bad news. He should not leave the office with this incorrect information. But who said that the information was incorrect? We don't know whether it's a schedule issue. We don't know if it's a scope issue. So A, B, and C are rather presumptuous in that we don't really know what the problem is. We can't assume it's schedule. We can't assume it's bad news. We can't assume that the news has anything to do with the project status. What we do know is that there's a problem that needs to be solved. So C is really the best option. Research the problem to identify a possible solution to using expert judgment and historical information from similar past projects. As I said previously, we may not need to use historical information, but if it's available and relevant, then we will. Expert judgment is typically used for lots of these things, and if it's an option, we can take it with a pinch of salt and say, well, we could use expert judgment to look into this problem. And don't forget, expert judgment isn't just the PM. It could be the PM using the expert judgment of others. For that reason, C is the best option. This question could prove to be a little bit tricky, but if you follow the rules of solving the problem after you've analyze the problem, make sure you've got the right solution to solve the problem, and be proactive, and then again, taking a look at A, don't assume it's a schedule or cost or scope issue. Remember the very important rule of thumb: even if there's a problem or an issue, you need to research it and look for solutions first before sharing that with the sponsor, your boss, customer, and so on. The PM is a problem solver. Let's take a look at another one here. The next one says, your project team appears to have been demotivated by a recent company announcement regarding project A42. You realize you need to motivate them. Which of the following will best act as a motivator for your team? Let's take a look at this one more time. The team appears to have been demotivated by a recent company announcement. We don't know what the announcement is regarding project A42, but we know they're demotivated. We can connect their demotivation to the company announcement somewhat. You realize you need to motivate them. Okay, doesn't tell me why, but I can figure out that I probably need to motivate them to continue with the project or to continue putting in the same amount of effort as they were previously. And it says, which of the following will best act as a motivator for your team? A, ensuring challenging work for individuals while on A42, and hygiene factors. Well, ensuring challenging work for individuals. That's a big statement. So we want to give everyone challenging work while on A42. Okay. Well, they were already on A42 previously, so the nature of the work wouldn't really change in my opinion. Let's look at B. Maslow's theory and individual professional responsibility in the efforts at hand. So this is saying use Maslow's theory and individual professional responsibility in the efforts. What does Maslow's theory state? The lower levels of the pyramid need to be met before the higher levels. And individual professional responsibility. It's a little bit vague. Individual professional responsibility, a bit vague. C, the magnitude of importance of the team's effort and project priority. Okay. That sounds plausible. The team's effort is important and the project's priority is important. Sounds plausible. Let's see D. Expectancy theory and intrinsic motivation of all individuals on the project. So when you think about expectancy theory, people put in hard work and they expect to be rewarded because they're putting in that work, right? So I don't know if we can say that we can apply that to all individuals on the project. The word all kind of disqualifies this one. It says expectancy theory and intrinsic motivation of all individuals. Well, not everyone is intrinsically motivated. To be intrinsically motivated is to be self-propelled. So that sounds bogus to me. So A sounds incorrect. It doesn't seem like the challenging work is the issue that might actually discourage them after whatever this announcement has been. We don't know, but doesn't sound like it adds up. So A and D are immediately disqualified in my mind. So I've got B and C to deal with. When I look at Maslow's theory, I mean, do you motivate the team with Maslow's theory? I mean, how? How do you do that? It sounds a bit vague. Unless you tell me concrete things about safety, love, belonging, and all that, and you make concrete references, just saying, oh, I'm going to use Maslow's to motivate my team sounds a bit vague. And then it says, and individual professional responsibility. What is that? You haven't told me it's a code of ethics, so I would disqualify B because it's closer to what could be a bit normal, but still it's not as normal as it sounds when you really dig into it. So that leaves me with C, the magnitude of importance of the team's effort. Get the team to realize that their work is important, their effort is important, and the project priority, wherever that lies on a scale, we don't know. It's still a little bit vague, but to me, that would be the best of the 4 options that have been given here. Let's take a look at one more. You are working with a risky vendor who has been known to under-deliver in previous projects. What should you do before executing? Should you purchase performance bonds? Fire the vendor? Do a what-if scenario analysis for each project iteration? Or create a performance report? So when you look at this, fire the vendor, B, would be out of the question in my mind. It doesn't solve the problem, doesn't help. Create a performance report. Well, what should you do before executing? You cannot create a performance report if there has not been any performance. So B and D are bogus. So you've got A and D. Purchase performance bonds. Performance bonds are used to guarantee in some way a level of performance, and if that level of performance isn't achieved, then the other party can take out those performance bonds. It assures them that you're capable, you're able to do the job, and the risk in the mind of the buyer is less when you buy these bonds. So we know the risk isn't totally gone, but it's transferred. It's a risk response strategy. Okay. And then C is do a what-if scenario analysis. That sounds plausible on its own. Do a what-if scenario analysis, but by the time you add the last part of this sentence, for each project iteration, do a what-if scenario analysis for each project iteration. I'm not sure what that tells me, because it doesn't tell me if this vendor is working across the entire project. You know what an iteration is? We're talking about like change-driven project management or iterative project management, and you know the way iterations work. You manage an iteration from start to end. You come out with one increment and you do it again and come out with another increment, and you're increasing the functionality as you go along. So I'm not sure what kind of project this is, but from what is being said, if I did a what-if scenario analysis for each project iteration, I'm not sure that would be a feasible option here. Because for each iteration, we're talking about iteration 1, and it's got its initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. Iteration 2, it's got its initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. This is clearly talking about before executing. So the best option in my mind, as far as risks are concerned, that really attacks the problem, Not just do the what if scenario analysis, even if that was an option. So we do an analysis and then what? Because as the PM, you also want to solve the problem. So for me, as someone taking this exam, looking for the PM to solve problems, get to closure, solve problems, performance bonds does help me from a risk perspective. A what-if scenario analysis is just half of what I need to pinpoint the risk response strategy. So I would go with A. C would be a little bit too, leaving it still up in the air, and also because it says for each project iteration, looking at the question, what should you do before executing, each project iteration just doesn't add up. All right, so if someone said do a what if scenario analysis before executing, well, it would have been a more plausible option. So I hope this has helped you when you see questions. We've gone through 3 questions, but you see it's taking quite a while. You need to get into that frame of mind when you're analyzing questions. Ask yourself, does it make sense? Is the PM solving the problem? Is the PM just escalating the problem, or is the PM analyzing the problem in search of answers? Has the problem been solved, or is it still hanging? Okay? And remember Emily's tips that I gave you in the beginning. Go through those again, and that should offer you some guidance when you're taking these questions on the exam. Remember, it's very situational and it's very, very analytical for anyone taking the PMP exam. So I hope that helped you. Remember, if you have any questions, send your questions to info@praizion.com if you're looking at PMP exam training and coaching for yourself, or you have a team of folks who you want to be trained and coached in person. We offer that training as well. Visit www.praizion.com. Send us an email, send us a message, and let's help you out. Remember, email us if you are having a spaced out PMP moment. All the best.